All right, welcome back to Give Black, Give Back Conversations. We host this conversation to explore the many facets of Black philanthropy and how philanthropy impacts the Black community. I am your co-host, Kia Jarmon, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-conspirator in this work, Lisa Swift-Young. Let's do a quick heart check before we jump all the way in and find out what's on your heart. So Lisa, what's on your heart and mind in this season?
Oh, wow. A lot of things in particular. Obviously, Juneteenth and the conversation around that, doing some background information on just what Juneteenth really means to our community is sort of where we are. Obviously, we're in the middle of a very, very warm summer. So I'm thinking it's hot, but then I'm thinking, you know what, it is my ancestors, created a platform for me to be in this space. And so it's hot, no doubt, but
it's very hot.
But at the same time, I am grateful for all that they have. Well, I do have access to air conditioning. We do have resources and that type of thing. And so I am even more grateful to them on days like today when I'm thinking, you know what, this is how they couldn't have imagined, us being in the house at this point in some cases. So those are my thoughts right now. How about you, Kia? What is on your mind? You always have some really great ideas and stuff going on and all of that. So what's going on?
I don't even know. I've got 1,000 things going through my mind, but you reminded me, I was pregnant during the summer. So my son was born July 23rd. And I remember anytime I formed my mouth to complain, I would think about our ancestors. I would think about what it meant to give birth in some of the hottest months of the year. I would think about what it meant to also give birth and then get right back outside, strapping that baby to your back in these conditions. I was outside today on the Greenway. I love our greenways around the city and the state, and then even going into other cities. I like to visit and be on the Greenway. I often, though, think about being a Black person on the Greenway and what that's like, and sometimes how our space is intruded upon. And that happens a lot of times, whether it is someone who doesn't have their animal on a leash, or whether it is, someone kind of creepily walking behind me, or someone trying to run me off the road with their bike. I mean, all of those things have happened and still happen. And I always channel the ancestors when it happens. I see those butterflies, and that's usually where the ancestors are for me. They show up in butterflies, and I just talk to them and say, thank you. I see you. I appreciate you. So that's what's on my mind, is just, as you were talking about the heat, it just going further with that is thinking about how grateful I am to be able to be inside, and to be reminded during this season of Juneteenth, as you mentioned, of the sacrifice that so many of our ancestors, forefathers, if you will, based on language that's out there, that they sacrificed and gave up so we could be here. So
yep.
So let me take us into this part. Why we call this Give Black, Give Back Conversations really is because Lisa and I co-chair Give Black, Give Back, which is an initiative housed at the Community Foundation in Middle Tennessee, with a goal to make sure that we amplify Black philanthropy and all of its excellence, and in particular, the $11 billion of giving that 2/3 of Black households give every year across the country. And so we have a 3-part mission. Let me share a little bit about that with you. We serve as a resource and amplifier of the Black-led, Black endowed funds housed at the Community Foundation. So here's the plug to say, if you have questions about those funds, if you have questions about how to start a fund, Lisa and I can support you in that. We also support the efforts of nonprofits in our community that support the Black community. And so if you are one of those nonprofits and you're not in the Community Foundation system with Giving Matters, we also want to support you in that. And then we also provide general access and information and education to the community at large who needs to understand the racial wealth gap. I heard a colleague the other day mention this, and it was so, I think, clear, made so clear visually. And they were saying, if you were sitting at the table playing Monopoly for 2 hours, and then I walked up as a Black woman and wanted to sit and get my fair share of, I wanted my money from the bank. I want to be able to purchase the train line, or I want to be able to purchase land. There, it would all be gone, right? Because the game has been going, and that's what the racial wealth gap. That's the 212 some odd years that Black people are behind our white counterparts. Understandably, though, what we highlight is making sure that you understand the Black excellence and understand how Black people have contributed. So it's not by any fault of being Black that has happened. And so we're here to make sure we educate you in that way. So Lisa, you want to share a little bit more about what we've done and what we're doing?
So, like, as Kia mentioned before, we're really about making sure the Black voices are amplified in all those three different areas. In particular, we talk about the wealth gap, we talk about in nonprofits, and we talk about in those who actually give money. And we actually do give money. So that's the thing, that $11 billion is a real thing. And people may be like, no, really, that's one of those things that people of our persuasion or diaspora have always given. We talk about Juneteenth specifically, and people, I think both of us had incidents where people have said, oh, the new giving, like, Blacks are now giving. And we've always given, just like Juneteenth has been around for 150 years. Yes, 150 years. 150 years. It's actually the oldest national celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery. So we've been doing this for a minute. I think the challenge is sometimes we don't get the highlight. And so this platform is really about how we amplify those voices and put those voices out there, those people who have done those things. Interesting, when I was doing some research in particular, I didn't know this, but in October of 1913, which is 50 years outside of the original Emancipation Proclamation, that W. Du Bois and the NAACP had a exposition. So the Emancipation Proclamation exposition was held, and it was just specifically around how freedom in particular, what that meant. And the interesting thing about that is that freedom extended beyond the US, as we do, we bring everybody along. So everyone in the diaspora participated in this Emancipation Proclamation exposition. And that sort of, we did it before, but it also kind of gave this great opportunity for us to sort of celebrate freedom for everyone. I don't know if anybody has read Thurgood Marshall's bicentennial speech. It is a scathing speech, so you must read it. And also Frederick Douglass's, what is 4th of July to a slave? Those conversations around freedom for everyone in particular. So when we talk about Juneteenth, we talk about freedom in the diaspora. We include everyone from that standpoint. And so when people, now that it's a federal holiday in the US, we've been celebrating for 150 years. Similar to your example earlier about the game being played, all of a sudden we come in and people are like, oh, this is new. And it's like, no, we've been here. We just have not been given equity as far as spacing is concerned. We've been celebrating. So, all the traditions are already out there. We don't necessarily need anyone to prescribe what we should do.
So you mean we didn't need a federal holiday? No, we did not need a federal holiday. We did not need anybody to make it a holiday because folks have been celebrating it for a long time. Yeah.
We don't need no ice cream. We don't need all that stuff y'all trying to do.
Or cake. Yeah. We don't need you. We thank you for thinking about us, and then please stop.
Please stop. So I think those.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Here's the opportunity, I think, for other communities to follow the lead, right? So follow and see what, more about asking the question about what has already been done. This thing in October of 1913. Also, it came up in the Civil Rights Movement, the Solidarity Day, the Poor People's Campaign in Washington in 1968. So, instead of, I think people are like, what should I do for Juneteenth? How does that look? Well, here's the thing. We've been doing this for 150 years. Your best bet is just to sort of follow along. And if you haven't had the opportunity as an African-American to celebrate Juneteenth, then there's some Black people who have, and you can kind of follow along with them. And we invite everyone to celebrate freedom, because this is really not just for us, but freedom for everyone. So not taking anything away from July 4th, but it's about the American, on this continent. But Juneteenth extends beyond, it's in the diaspora. And so we celebrate that in that space in particular. So I just think that's a thing that I think people are, as this is our first official year. Last year kind of came on the heels of like, oh, it's going to be a holiday, type of thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
as we start looking, it's like, what should you do on Juneteenth? What is Juneteenth all about? We've already decided what it's about. We don't necessarily need any direction. So I would strongly encourage. It's really an opportunity for us to celebrate the freedom of everyone in the
Yeah.
diaspora.
Yeah, just to give a little context for folks. So Juneteenth is such an important day of celebration because it was the holiday that commemorates the last enslaved folks being freed in 1865, 2 or so years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and those folks who were enslaved were in Texas. So sometimes the question comes up about why do we celebrate this Texas holiday? Well, Lisa just gave really clear idea about why we do that, because we're really embracing the entire diaspora, but it's also that if all of us are not free, none of us are free. So when we have folks who are still unaware, and when you think about the direct lineage of then to now, the amount of people who are just unaware of their own in capturing, right? They're still enslaved. When you think about that, and we have a lot of correlations to that today, some of us are just not necessarily aware of what is happening or how harmful the world has been to us. So I wanted to give that a little bit of clarity. But Lisa, you brought up something that really kind of made me write down a question about what is the cost of freedom? And so, of course, we talk about philanthropy. So in philanthropy, we define as time, talent, treasure, truth, and testimony. And so while we give that $11 billion, we also use this platform to share truth and testimony in our talents as well. And of course, our time. So I wanted to give that context, but what's the cost of freedom? So Lisa, what are your thoughts about that? The cost of being free?
Oh, that's a good one. So I just finished Angela Davis's Freedom is a Constant Struggle. So I think that the cost to be free, I think it takes tenacity. I think it takes resilience. I think it is a force of will. I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier when we first got started. It was like those people thinking about something beyond what was in front of them. And that sort of freedom of your mind is sort of first, right? That sort of getting into a space where you see yourself in a different space. I think that's where freedom is. And I think the cost of that is sort of rejecting what is maybe in front of you and seeing what is beyond you. Freedom and faith have a lot to me are connected very closely. So I think having the faith and having freedom are sort of intertwined, if you will. And the cost is just being bold and thinking about something more than what you see right now. And I think the cost of that is sometimes ridicule. I think the cost of that sometimes is, unfortunately, your life to stand up for your principles. I mean, we know many instances where that's been the case, where people have literally given their lives. But it is a decision. I think it's a decision to be free. And I think you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, a decision now to be free, right? Certainly not the decision of our ancestors. When I think about that question, or I'm listening to you talk about it in that way, which I think is so important and relevant, I think about the three things that had to happen to capture us. You take our faith and our faith institution, i.e., so those are can be two different things, but faith and our faith institution, i.e., our God, and you weaponize that. You take our land, or the space in which we are to be taking up, and you take our culture and you demonize that in some way. And those three things have been the cost, the sacrifice that we made, is we had to give up our ability to be in spaces and sometimes be faithful and be faith-filled, to maintain that faith in the midst of such atrocious environments. I think about even now the land that we're on, the land I walk on when I go to the Greenway, as I mentioned earlier, the ability or inability to afford housing. I just reposted something on Instagram that median rent in Nashville, Tennessee is $2,100, $2,100 median average rent. We are on pace with Chicago and some of our larger metropolitan cities. So that's, sacrifice of land and space and inability to be able to purchase those things. And then taking our culture, i.e., seeing on the news feeds that Juneteenth was going to be trademarked by a company that's led by a white man. And as well as, Walmart and other companies taking on the getting the profit. See, this is the reason why that's so challenging. I want to just say there for a second, that's so challenging because these are not Black owned companies that are selling during Juneteenth. This is a white led company. So you're still advancing, you're still receiving money off of Black people, off of our holiday, off of something we didn't necessarily need or invite other people too. And so I was reading up on, I'm saying all this to make this point. I was reading this website. It's a farmers union, the National Farmers Union, and it was talking about Juneteenth and the broken promise of the 40 acres and a mule. And in one part of it, it talks about that there was a Union general, William Sherman, who had the idea or who brought forth the idea, because I always want to make sure we're clear that when white men bring things forth, it is likely someone else's idea. The idea of 40 acres and a mule, so that Black people had opportunity to have property, money, education, and so forth, because without that path, there was no economic independence. Here's where we are. But really, the idea was presented to General Sherman by some Black pastors, some Black ministers in Savannah, Georgia, who told him the way we can best take care of ourselves is to have land and turn it and till it by our own labor. We still don't have our 40 acres and a mule. We still don't have economic independence largely, right? So I know that the question may come up about with my friend, I know this person over here, they have economic independence. Those are exceptions. And we want to talk about how we set a new rule. And so what new rules, Lisa, that leads me to ask you, what new rules do we think about relative to philanthropy? And I say new rules, not necessarily new philanthropy, but new rules to approaching philanthropy. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think, that's a really great point. I think, that is the core of what is really, I think, when we talk about freedom in particular, freedom to be able to take care of your own on your own land and have your own peace. And as I was doing the research, there's actually a document back in, at the beginning of this whole celebration of Juneteenth in particular in Texas, there was a fundraising effort. So they had the forethought to think about this. They could not celebrate. So you got to remember, we're talking about right after Emancipation Proclamation, Black folks didn't have anything in particular, but they thought enough. And this was in Texas, outside of Houston, Texas. There's an Emancipation Park that was actually purchased for $1,000 that they put together and created a park in Houston, Texas, so that they could celebrate. It also happened in Mexicana, Texas, that they purchased Booker T. Washington Park, which became the celebration site. So here's the thing, I think, having that land to be able to sort of, make these celebrations and continue that legacy literally kept us moving forward, because they had the intent there of saying, I'm going to purchase this land so that we can have this celebration, so we can always commemorate this, and this goes down in history as where we celebrate, and so that we have this space. So I think what needs to happen when we talk about, Give Black, Give Back, and blackgivingback.com, if that's where all of the Black funds that are housed at the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee reside, and you can actually take a look at those, is being intentional about how you give, because these people were very intentional at that point with the meager resources that they had. They put those things together and they purchased this land that now exists, so that we still have this symbol of emancipation from that standpoint. So I think the intentionality about how we move money in our communities, we talk about the $11 billion, but that money is not always going to a Black-led organization, as to your point, so that money is sort of scattered throughout the society, and it's not necessarily functional in a way that we want it to, we want it to be. We've been celebrating Juneteenth for 150 years. If we wanted ice cream, trust and believe we would have got ice cream. Right?
Well, you know what? Just as a little pin there, ice cream was one of those things. What it also was, and I'm gonna pull it up here just a second. But ice cream was one of those things where also we were not allowed to have certain
Right.
to things like ice cream. So when things are weaponized against us, even things like watermelon, we were not eating watermelon in the ways in which we're talked about, or fried chicken. Do you think that we have fried chicken?
Oh no.
To us, we had scraps accessible.
We had gizzards, we had chitlins, we
right.
had,
but that's the culture that has been turned, right? So take that, say, okay, we see people eating it. If we make this harmful in some way, then we can take away the culture, or we can make the culture demonized, or something that people don't ascribe to or aspire to have. So that just a little pin note there about, yes, if we wanted ice cream, we certainly, if I remember correctly, a Black man is the person who invented the ice cream. We certainly don't need any permission to have ice cream. And we certainly could have also partnered large companies and small companies with a company that is Black owned who is selling those things.
Right. We had Beatrice with Richard Lewis back in the day. And so, we had, there was some opportunities. So I think the thing is that what people need to understand about Juneteenth, we talk about in particular Black women, so there's a really great article, if those of you who have not checked it out, it's on Shondaland, which I always will support Black women all day long, but it's called How Black Women Have Power of Philanthropy Through History. You can Google it. And it just talks about how our dollars, no matter how much we made at every level, we made a commitment to change. And I think to your question, how should we change? How we can be more and more intentional specifically, and it just basically kind of gives, all these great stories about Black women. Osceola McCarty, we know about, she was a washerwoman down in, I believe, in Mississippi, and she ended up giving so many millions of dollars away to a university, or a large sum of money, I should say $1 million, but a large sum of money. That even though Black women, and this is directly from the article, even though Black women are, if we look at the net worth scale, and I don't like net worth from the standpoint of net worth meaning dollars, not net worth as a person. I want to be clear with that. Despite that there's an estimated almost $1 million in earnings that Black women lose over a 40-year career, we still give 54%, still give regularly to support causes and organizations that they care about. So even though we have meager resources, we've always done that. And so I would like to see us move more intentional to things that can be sustainable, so that we're giving to organizations, Black-led funds and nonprofits specifically, that can actually advance that and make that money sort of grow and go from that standpoint. So just so many different opportunities out there.
No, that's a really good point you're making about the $1 million, and what and I want to punctuate that a little bit, because a little bit more, because I think it's worth staying there as we have people who are listening in. And of course, as Lisa mentioned, we invite you to blackgivingback.com to learn more about what we're doing. As we think about that, 54% of women giving a large amount of their money. What we know in general is that Black people give in higher frequencies than white people. The data reflects that. But Black women also give. And so if you're an employer and you have the ability, your responsibility here is also to think about how can you decrease the disparity in the wealth gap, with pay equity in your office. How do you bring up the women in your office who are making less dollars, cents on the dollar, in comparison to white men? How do you bring them up? Because when you bring those folks up to actual scale, then what happens is our community is better. And so, and that's really what this article really helps us to understand, is that when Black women are supported, and that support looks like financial support, that support looks like sharing power in some way, then what we know is that the community is better, because on the back of every movement we've ever had, there are Black women. Yes. And what I said a moment ago is that who takes things to market, who takes things to the patent office, who takes things and writes it in a book, are white men. But who is behind either being experimented on, who is, the nurse who is the teacher or the aide, who is the social worker, who is the one feet to the street, it is inevitably always Black women and other communities as well. And so we want to really make sure that we bring up those folks to really close that wealth gap. You do that by making sure people get more earnings, get more money.
Yes.
And so that would
more equity. So we're all about equity. So that's sort of our conversation. So some people may be saying, okay, well, so so you guys have told us what not to do. So what do you think that are some really actionable tasks that people could take today that would say they honor the legacy and the struggle on this day of reflection for Juneteenth, like of recognizing the ancestors? What would be some things that you would say that someone could participate in or do that would honor that, other than some of the commercial options that are out there?
Yeah, I'm always going to start with understanding history. When you understand history better, so we've already mentioned a few names, but those are names that you could easily Google. But go find some of the folks that were on the front lines of this work, of not just Juneteenth, any movement. Start anywhere you want in history and go find the Black folks, the men and women, and even young people, because we often forget that when we look at movements like the Black Panthers, Fred Hampton was 17, 18, something like that.
Yeah.
Very young.
Very young.
Very young people. So go also find those young people too who are in the community. So I always believe, go back and find your history. That's for Black and white people. What I would say, if I'm speaking directly to white individuals who are listening or leaders in our community, is for you to also go and sit in conversation about what your lineage is relative to the history. Right. So what was did your family own people? Did you own land? Did you understanding your legacy? And then I always give space for grace. And the grace means that when you find out your history, you then need to have forgiveness, a ritual of forgiveness. And the forgiveness is not necessarily for yourself. You didn't necessarily do anything, but the forgiveness is sometimes so that you can research further and not believe all of these atrocious things about even though there's atrocious things about maybe your background or your family, that those things are worth looking into and worth you doing better by. Mm-hmm. So the forgiveness is so that you can then trust yourself enough to keep going deeper into the history. So I always start with history. I think the other part is this is a great opportunity, but not just this time. And I really want us to get out of doing giving or philanthropy just during key moments on the calendar. I really want you to, but if you're going to give your money this month, and I encourage you to do a recurring gift, and it could be a small gift. I always encourage like a Netflixable gift, $15 a month that just recurs, because then an organization knows every month they're going to get your $15. And yes, you can write $1,500 or $15 million checks as well. I imagine they would love those, but write those checks to those organizations who are continuing to do the work to repair what I mentioned, restoring faith, restoring land, and restoring culture. And if you give to organizations who are doing that, and there are lots of ways in which that shows up, it could be working, organization working with children who are restoring the integrity of young people and what they're not learning in school, or maybe what school has tried to strip from them. It could be a faith institution, an organization that you know or enjoy. It could be working with an organization that works on sidewalks or biking or greenways or open spaces in some way as it relates to repairing and restoring land. So there are lots of creative ways to do this, but give money. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is I'm always going to go to redistributing power. You don't have to have a voice in this moment. Sometimes we're looking to be, have it branded and make it look a certain type of way. And we want a credit for something. We are highly in the credit business. We want a title, i.e., I want to be an ally, which I don't believe in. And then we want to be rewarded for that title. I would rather you sit in absolute silence and do the work behind the scenes than need to have the title. So this is also where you have to yield to other communities of people, listen to other people, provide space for other people When my white colleagues ask me, how do I support Black people better? I have lots of answers, but one of them is make room for people to be themselves, right? Make room for them to take up space, make room for them to adjust themselves in the space. That often doesn't happen. If as a Black woman, I've been in lots of rooms where I say something, 5 minutes later, someone else says something, the same exact something. And somehow that was heard more than what I was saying. And I'm very clear, I'm very articulate, I'm a communicator. So it's not difficult for me to say, but it's because people are not willing to listen because we've been squished and pushed down in so many ways. So really allowing people to take up some of the power, leverage your power so someone else can get some access to that. And so that you're not the centerpiece. And that's what we saw in those Juneteenth promotions. That's what we're seeing. Actually, we're also in the middle of Pride, and it's important for me because we talk about Blackness all the way around, and so we also have members of the LGBTQ plus community. Even during Pride, you cannot just slap the rainbow on your logo and in some way that is celebrating Pride. Pride was upheld by a Black trans woman, Marsha P. Johnson. We need to, you can't give reverence to Pride or the LGBTQ plus community unless you are willing to uphold Blackness, unless you're willing to see Black people, unless you're willing to see what it means to be Black queer, Black gay, Black lesbian, Black bi, whatever your situation is. And I don't speak for that community, I'm not in that community, but I certainly want to hold space for that as we're having this conversation. You can't just put the Pan-African colors on your flag and somehow that is Juneteenth. So this is the time for you to allow people into the space who need to speak up, who want to speak up, who want to take space, who want to take off and take some time. I personally believe that white folks should go to work on Juneteenth, because again, we're talking about how we repair. And so how we repair is that you go to work and we are allowed to be at home and be in peace and be in celebration and be in honoring and really sometimes in grieving for our ancestors. That's why I say that. Because that's what equity will look like, is really if you're able to repair a harm, a historic harm. That's how you repair the harm. Work still has to happen. You all can go to work and we would be able to be at home and really be able to be in celebration in the ways that some other holidays are celebrated. So
I would just put a pin in, like in the history piece, I mentioned a couple of different resources. If somebody's like, it's very specific. Freedom is a constant struggle. Angela Davis, obviously I mentioned that. Frederick Douglass speaks, what is the 4th of July? What to a slave is the 4th of July? And also Thurgood Marshall's bicentennial speech. All those are Googleable. So if you're wondering why there needs to be a Juneteenth and a 4th of July, I think those pieces specifically will give you some background on some history, specific history that you can sort of put together. I know some people, you're doing the racial reckoning, everybody went to watch The Help. I want to make sure that we are ready. Make sure that we're really intentional about what we mean by history, like what pieces in particular that you need to sort of just to kind of go through. And so kind of go through that. I think, people can attend celebrations, as you mentioned before, and take the time to sort of look at, and, I think to your point, I think Juneteenth is really about acknowledging freedom and the fact that I think you mentioned it earlier in sort of an African Ubuntu, I am because we sort of have that piece with that. And so Juneteenth is really an opportunity for us to sort of reflect in a way that's very different on our freedom and the cost that has been paid for that freedom in a way that is not necessarily just an American construct, but a diaspora construct. And that's very different from the 4th of July experience that we have is about the United States and not necessarily about the diaspora. We see as African Americans ourselves beyond just one continent. We are not bound by just one confine. We are diaspora all over. So whether or not you are still on the continent, or whether you're in South America, wherever you are, or Asia, Australia, we happen to be everywhere. We want to take this day as an opportunity of who is still not free, to your point, who is still fighting that struggle and taking the time to really acknowledge those. So I think those things that will do honor to Juneteenth about like who else still needs to be free, LGBTQ plus community, you know, those types of things. I think those are intentional things. So this holiday and how to recognize it and appreciate it is the cost of our freedom, those who have paid the cost, acknowledging them, but then looking around and saying who else still needs to be free. Because I think as African-American women, as Black women, we're always looking to support other people, which is another reason why when we get equity, everyone else gets equity too, because we're all about from that standpoint. So I think, you know, I want to be very intentional. Then obviously, you know, blackgivingback.com are very specific funds here in the Nashville metro area that do the work specifically around, you know, building, you know, racial equity. You know, a lot of them are in racial equity or advocating for Black voices or advocating for Black-led nonprofits. So you can be very intentional about what you do. So I think it's a huge opportunity to reinforce what's going on already, but I do think it's an opportunity to step back and say who has already paid the price, acknowledging those here and abroad as freedom, as really an opportunity to say, who still needs to be free and how do we be about that? And I don't know that there's another holiday that looks at everyone and is not very centric to just one country. This is Juneteenth, is sort of, that's how we kind of see it. So that's what I would tell people to do. There's very specific pieces. I Am Not Your Negro on Netflix. If you guys have it, is a good piece to sort of understand, like, what is Juneteenth? What is this all about? There's a really cute little film called Miss Juneteenth, and it's basically a pageant. So if you want to know what we've been doing for the past 150 years doing this, just some things that are actually, you know, things that we've been doing for all along. We were not waiting for people to celebrate freedom. We were very active in doing so. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I was going to also bring up, let's see, I was going to also bring up another day if you're in Tennessee, the 8th of August. That's the Emancipation Day of Tennessee. It's also Kentucky's as well, as I was having a conversation with a colleague about that. But that also, what I'm also encouraging is, as you're thinking about that history, think about Juneteenth. And that's the one that, of course, is the most commemorative. It's the largest one because it's the last one that where people were being enslaved, people were able to be free, but also whatever community you come from. I know we have watchers and listeners from all over because we've gotten outreach from people from all over the place. And so go and find your community's day of history. Go and learn more about those folks in your community who've been doing excellent things. That's another way to uphold this too, is to make sure that when you're reading about Black history and Black stories, that you counter both sides, that you look at what the harm has been, and then you also go and have an opportunity to look at what the joy and triumph has been. The reason why that's so important is because if the narrative will always be, because the foundation of this country is racism, and that's how we designed race, and that's how we created all of this that we're in now. But we know that that's the foundation, and so we don't have to agree to that, because that's just what the foundation is. There's too much data and research and tools for that. I'm sitting here looking at the 1619 Project. That's another great book for folks to pull up as well. But go and look at your history too. Go and find out what's happening in your community. Go make sure that you're not just upholding the narrative of Black oppression, but you're also upholding Black joy. Both are important to the conversation. And joy, I was sharing this earlier with someone. Joy is not just smiles and giggles. Joy is resistance. Joy is disrespect sometimes. Joy is dissecting, it's disrupting, it's repairing. It is trying to get, particularly for Black folks, us back to a place that some of us have never been. And so joy does not always come to us by, frolicking in the field, though that may be fine. it is also comes to us by taking up lots of space, being the for Black women the backbone of our communities and our movements. And that I think about the picture of Fannie Lou Hamer, and I just can see her, kind of hand in the air. You felt what she was saying in that photo. I think about that is joy, even though it's like it may not look the way that we see joy. I look at it as joy because she's pushing us forward. She's pushing us to a place that gets us free. When we keep going back to freedom, how do we get to freedom? We don't get to freedom by having tea and crumpet. I mean, we get to freedom by having to be in places that are often rejecting us. And so I just think about, I just keep going back to freedom as being one of those areas we need to think about more, but that in history gives us a chance to really revisit freedom, or understand what freedom is or isn't, and maybe where we are or aren't in our
right.
world, right? So yeah,
being authentic. So I think one of the things that being free means being authentically who you are and who you were meant to be and who God made you to be, and so that piece of and being in a space where that embraces that supports that really recognizes that, whether or not you wear your hair straight, you wear your hair curly, you wear your hair however, the freedom to be who you were meant to be, and all of the glory with that, that is, if that's probably the basic sense of freedom, just allowing, not really allowing, but embracing someone else's right to be different, or however they want to. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've enjoyed. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say this is just about basic humanity. I mean, at the core of all of this, we can use whatever language we want to use.
But it's just about being human. And so that piece of, but our ancestors did not have that, and Juneteenth was an opportunity for them to sort of be able to say we are free, in the sense of we can now begin to be who we were meant to be, and not dictated about how that is. And so and to honor that, to again appreciate the sacrifices that they made, but also to find those opportunities to free other people as well, because that's what Black women do, right? The studies show it, the articles show it, we know it. So I think if you're going to support it, then I think supported it in those ways, about how do you support freedom? What does freedom look like, to your point, to everyone? And that's the spirit of Juneteenth. Juneteenth is literally the spirit of just everybody being free and doing what they do and how they do it and who they are, and letting the rest work itself out.
Yeah. So quick checkout. What are you doing for Juneteenth?
Oh, I have a couple of things. So we're doing locally, we're doing Jazz on the Cumberland. I think that's what's happening. So it happens to also be Father's Day. So I don't know how the men feel about this, because we were talking about like how Juneteenth and Father's Day seem to be following each other pretty closely. So I don't know, there might be a whole conversation around that. So we're gonna do that with some friends and some people in particular. I've got a couple of talks coming up that we're doing around diversity specifically. So that's what I'm going to kind of be doing, and just really, appreciating, like your story in particular, when we talk about at birth of babies. I always give a story that my maternal grandmother had 14 individual births. So I'm always like, whenever I thought it was too much, I would be like, no, that's not it.
Yeah, absolutely same. I was a 13 on my side. So
that's not it. That's
my
not
paternal.
So I think so really just like enjoying, like, what would she would have been, she's since passed on, but what would she have, like that strength to me keeps me going in a lot of different ways, but being intentional about that. So for me, Juneteenth is about that. I'm really on discovery of looking at East Africa and really understanding. They have, by the way, they have freedom days there. That's a thing on the continent. So in case we didn't know that, we can might be able to pull that all together. So just really learning about, just in general, just things that dealing with Black folks. That's pretty much it. How about you? What's Juneteenth look like for you?
Well, one, I can't wait to see you move to East Africa, because I think that's coming. While I'm in West Africa, you can be in East Africa. We will meet in the middle. But Juneteenth, so usually my family does family reunions on 4th of July. And the way it works, as I mentioned, my grandfather had 13 siblings. and 12 of which were, grew to adults. And so each of their children host. And so this year, my grandfather's children are hosting this year, and I'm, grandchild, so I'm a part of the hosting. And so this year we're doing it on Juneteenth with the hope that everyone will continue to move it to Juneteenth versus the 4th of July. We're hosting it here in Nashville. It kicks off on Friday. I am unveiling our family crest. So I have had our family crest designed. And what's so funny, a guy asked me, he said, who are you, English? And I said, no, I'm African. And so our family crest and legacy. And so it encapsulates really what our family stands for, which is agriculture, faith in God, music, and education. Those 4 tenets are really what our entire family is about. That goes back to our land in West Tennessee, which we still have. And that is really reflective in who my great grandfather was, who my grandfather was, who my parents are, who my aunts are, and their children are. And so it's really exciting to see that, come together. So I'm excited about that. We're doing a libation ceremony on Sunday where we're calling forth the ancestors that are no longer here. And our friend, Bridget Jones, who's now at the Belmead Plantation as the director of equity, she will be coming out to lead the libation ceremony rather. To talk about West Tennessee, our family there. She's from West Tennessee as well, so she knows all about our folks. And so come out and do that and really hold space for that. We'll do a circle storytelling. So really upholding, our history, going back to history, our stories, our truth, our testimony. And so I'm excited about that. Also, quick note, for everyone paying attention here, August is Black Philanthropy Month. So I just want to give a little note and nugget that we will, as always, do have a full list of activities that are coming soon during Black Philanthropy Month. Lisa and I will be hosting conversations as we've done. We will hopefully be giving out some money as we've done in the past as well. And then, of course, we will let you know about Give Black, Give Back Day. That will be coming up as well. So we're excited about the month of August being Black Philanthropy Month. I believe this is the 12th or 13th year. We'll have to get the number right.
Of the official Black Philanthropy Month as far as, So definitely check back in. We've got a lot of really great talks coming up and some people that you definitely want to hear from and hear about specifically. We'll be diving into that June 8th date for Tennessee, specifically around Emancipation Proclamation. So we'll be talking about that, but a lot of really good conversations around Black philanthropy and what it has meant. And we're hoping to be a broad-based, move it outside of Nashville Metro, but out of Tennessee, out into the whole Tennessee, and so that you'll hopefully be able to see about some great things that are happening in other areas. So make sure you subscribe and make sure when these talks come up, because I do this a lot of good information you definitely want to get, especially just around Black philanthropy and how we've given over time. And by the way, in my studies, as far as looking at East Africa, the Lion of Judah is on the crest for Ethiopia. So it was there before.
This is why we have to remind people, who the original people are. And so it's certainly important for us to bring that back. So it was important for me to bring that forward.
Yes.
Couple of quick things before we check out. If you are looking for a philanthropy advisor, someone to come in your organization and support you through either your diversity, equity, inclusion, or your employee giving, employee volunteerism, corporate social responsibility, whatever it's called, Lisa and I are happy to do that. If you are looking to give money and don't know where to start, go to blackgivingback.com. We have a list of nonprofit organizations that are listed there. And of course, if you want to support any of the funds there, we also invite you to do that. And just in general, check around, peruse the website and learn more. Lisa, last words and thoughts.
Yes, blackgivingback.com is going to be your site to get all this information. Make sure you take a look at it. We would not be doing this without the support of the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. So we want to thank them for people who are behind the scenes. Audra Cox is always amazing. You will find her information on there directly for the Community Foundation. So please reach out to her if you have any questions in particular. Also share your stories. We want to make sure we get your stories on there. This is about cataloging information. So we want your stories. We know there's so many stories out there. What's your Juneteenth celebration look like? Tell us about that. Like just maybe share that with someone who wants to know what a Juneteenth celebration looks like. We'd be happy to have that story and share it maybe on a later broadcast or just in general. We just want to get your information out there. So we want to thank, so I am Lisa Swift-Young, and this is Kia Jarmon, my co-conspirator, and here, blackgivingback.com. Don't forget to go there, the Give Black, Give Back initiative. Thank you. Stay cool outside. And we will be checking back with you before too much longer, but make sure you take a look and keep us, tab us, or whatever you need to do. Is however you reach out to us, make sure you keep in touch with us, because we've got some really good information that will not only enrich you, but enrich your family and also help you just enrich your life. Thank you.